Uh, Buenos dias. Good morning. I don't know. Don't ask me what day it is because I don't know. I just know the sun's coming up. Naturally, in the morning, a lot of things get processed. So I thought, okay, if you're going to share some data, share some information, share some data-driven experiences, the same way that we share data in cell phones, right? Just like when you have a contract or a non-prepaid phone, right? You're paying for data transfer. So you're running a data-driven communication system. So this may seem like I'm going to throw some terms out here based on the English alphabet that is just simply a way to see if I mention a few terms, it snaps a much larger set of data, a data set, okay, that is held in memory, okay, in the morphogenetic field structure. So I realized that because I'm aware of so much data that is spinning through the heart wheel, the light wheel of your heart chakra, which pushes all that data through all the other circuits that I'm aware of in both hemispheres of my brain, if you will, which essentially is the sum of my awareness at any one given now-time moment. Okay? So what I'm beginning to realize is that the data is speeding up, okay, in its data transfer between units of consciousness that are becoming more aware of more data. Okay? It's one of the reasons I love to make comments sometimes on Robert David Steele's website or his YouTube channel, because he has a lot of people or a lot of guests that have worked within the system, the government, if you will, or academia at very high levels. So one of the things you begin to realize, for example, yesterday he had an interview with a guy who was a self-described Mennonite when he was in his youth and worked at various levels within the United States government, and he's basically a financial wizard. So one of the words that he used last night or yesterday in the video with Robert David Steele is parasitic. That seems to be a common theme now, running through, if you will, some of the more movers and shakers of people that have large audiences. Parasitic consciousness. Okay? That's what we're dealing with on the planet, is what I call vampiric consciousness, which means it can't generate any love, so it can't generate any source-derived light. Okay? That's the crux of the problem. Okay? When you bring it down to what I would call critical mass. We're reaching a critical mass. So think about a nuclear bomb reaching critical mass. And then think about mass density, density consciousness. What is the density of our consciousness? We're raising the expansion of the density consciousness, which means we're aware of more data that is traveling at a higher rate of speed, which is going to raise our awareness, which allows us to comprehend more data. So we are experiencing the data at a higher speed rate. So when we're reaching a higher speed rate of consciousness, which is the speed at which we're experiencing who we are, is going up. Okay? That's all data-driven. Now, granted, I try and qualify this in the beginning because I don't think about the data. I don't call it data. I think about it as an experience. I'm experiencing the data, okay? Because you can numerically quantify the experience that you're having, which means, theoretically, and now we get into hive mind Borg AI stuff, I could choose for you what it is you're going to experience without you even being aware of it. How about that? So a few things that I wanted to just put some light on okay, which is putting the light on the subject, which means exposing the negative, right? Just like in a 35 millimeter camera, you put a roll of film in it, you're going to expose the dark, right? And then you get to see the picture. The hologram. So when you think of being inside of a simulator, 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 everything is all data-driven, isn't it? Numerically quantified and qualified. So I thought of this when one of the comments that this man made with Robert David Steele is what we find when we look at ourselves in the mirror is that we're all doing things that just don't serve us, do we? No, we don't. And we can measure that, can't we? We can measure the data. So throw this into the hopper. I forget his last name, but his first name is Colin. And he's a commentator. He's out of the UK. He works with Miles Johnson, Basis Project, which is both a website and a YouTube channel. And I always give him kudos because he provides a mountain of data, okay? Because he took the time as a former BBC journalist, realizing, hey, now I'm aware of something I wasn't aware of before. Wow, this is big news. But they don't want us to cover this kind of stuff and spread that information. Hell, they might even come after me and kill me if the people knew about this information. And that's true. Look what they did to William Cooper. My father knew William Cooper. I was very aware of what was going on, for example, at Boys Town in the early 1980s. My father was very plugged in, okay, and was providing me with a lot of information, and I was providing a lot of information to my father. There used to be a pretty cool publication back in the early 1970s called Review of the News, which means this is the narrative. This is what they're telling you is happening, but this is what's really happening that they don't want you to know. And this sort of allows you to begin to realize, well, what the fuck is the truth? Now we're back to living in a lie versus living in the truth. How do you know what's true? Well, that depends on you. That depends on me. Because the truth to one person is not necessarily going to be the truth to somebody else. Now we're back to data-driven experiences. Now we're back to when I was in my childhood, tagging data. Remember the guy who said, we are doing things that don't serve us. That's because we're not value-driven data tagging things that we realize don't serve us. So delete that. Uninstall that. Return to sender. So what you're doing is you're choosing, as you're experiencing the data that you realize doesn't serve you. And in this classroom, that's called coursework. You're learning what serves us and what doesn't, based on the energy of the experience, which represents the data. Because you can numerically quantify and describe the experience in living spirit. So if you are what love is in living spirit, and you hold all life sacred that is spirit, we do no harm. Because then we're doing harm to ourselves. And the reason that we know that is because we will experience that. That's the golden rule. So when you experience how the golden rule works, you realize how the cosmos works. Here. This is the training simulator. Now you can call it a classroom in a sense of a classroom. We've got a lot of students in here, right? We've got a lot of visitors in here. So there were a couple of things that I wanted to make sure that I didn't forget, that I thought were sort of important, but it applies to all the above and everything else that I put in here. So for example, this guy Colin from the Basis Project one time mentioned, he said, being in the tunnel of Set. The tunnel of Set. Oh, tunnel. Well, I know what a tunnel is. I've been in a tunnel. That's what we used to call a confined space. That's confined data. That's not a very big data stream, is it? So there's two things that I sort of plug into, which relate to experiences of things that I both experienced and became aware of. So I began to be aware of that over time, okay? An event-driven timeline that when I was a child growing up, I was around other people whose state of awareness was higher because they could hold more data in their light that they were aware of, that I was aware of. So therefore, the speed at which I'm experiencing my data, so I can hold all that information as comprehension of it all fitting together, which is like I have a puzzle in my head. It's already put together. So we can reverse engineering by describe all the data, because it takes time to describe the data, which represents the puzzle that is already put together. So if you realize that the light in which they're spinning through their heart chakra is also holding an enormous amount of data, then I know that they can hold a lot of data that I'm holding in me, and I can transfer that data into them, and they can hold it, which means they can see the same construct, the same puzzle, because they're capable of holding that much data, and they can see how the puzzle is already together. Wow! You see what I'm saying? So what I noticed over time, by around the mid-1980s, and I think I mentioned this once before, that I noticed that people were not able to hold as much data, that their attention span, as we call it, their ability to hold X amount of bits and bytes of information, which represent the data that they're running on, is very short. You know, it's just like they can't, when you start to exchange the information or the data that you're aware of with them, they will cut you off because they just can't hold that much information. That's known as the tunnel of Set. They operate on tunnel vision, which is limited data. Okay? So John Gatto, G-A-T-T-O, has a number of great videos on his own YouTube channel that he used to have. I think he passed away. I don't know that he's still with us. He was a teacher in New York City public schools. He also taught at very elite schools, for if you want to call them the elite. Okay, I call them energy parasites, energy accumulators, because they live in fear of losing energy because they can't generate any light, which is any love. Okay, they love their density. Okay, so they maintain their density by making sure they got plenty of money. Okay, so they never lose their money, so they never lose their power, which means they're never going to lose what it is they're aware of that they're holding an attachment to, which means they're attached to all that stuff. Okay, they don't know how to let go of all that stuff and just be free to be who they are in living spirit. So that's an entirely different subject. I think I covered that at one time about giving away electrons versus holding on to electrons. And the more electrons you're holding on to that represent energy, that's density. You can describe that as density consciousness. So when you think of pure consciousness, okay, which is you're not holding anything captive. You're giving it all away, just like the sun does up there. See the sun up there? Yeah. That's free energy. You're getting free energy. We're all getting free energy from that sun. So that's one of the reasons why I thank her every morning. Thank you very much for your energy. Okay? So the energy of the cosmos that we get from that sun, they don't charge us for that. There isn't any fee. Okay? So anyway, before I forget, I wanted to cover one other important subject, which had to do with, there's a guy by the name of Jason Whitlock. I think I mentioned him before. He used to be a sports journalist on Fox News. So he's been going back and forth, and now there seems to be a lot of traction on this subject in the sports media community especially. It's also sort of carried over into the area of Glenn Beck, who himself has a large audience, okay? And now we're getting down to, and this is very important, by the way, we're finally reaching critical mass about a god and a goddess, source and a god, okay? How you perceive creation, okay, through a male or a female, etc. So I wrote a long comment to Jason Whitlock yesterday because he's being criticized that they're going back and forth between athletes in sports, particularly the NBA, over a girl named Breonna Taylor, who was apparently shot by the police. So one of the things that Jason Whitlock says, you've got to uncover all the data, okay, to put the full story together. See, that now we're back to data. It's much like, for example, if you want to investigate something that happened 100 years ago and I did a research paper on something, I wanted to make sure that if I'm going to write a story and say this is what happened, I wasn't there, I didn't experience it. And even if I was there and I experienced it, it means that I'm going to experience it based on the vibration through how I perceive the universe. And we already know this not only from studies, but because I worked in fire, for example, I know when we want to go back to find out what was the cause of that fire, we got to look at every stone, which means every variable, every potential variable that exists within the data stream. Okay? So we can actually pull the hologram up, go back in time, and see exactly who started that fire, if it was man-caused or girl-caused, or whether it was caused by lightning. But there's a way in which we can determine what the cause was. How did this thing start? Okay? So we have ways to be able to do that. So when you go back and look at a story that happened because you didn't experience it directly, then this is secondhand information. So if you're getting information from somebody who says that they were there, that's really hearsay. You're gaining the information that represents how they experienced what they experienced. And then you're going to get different points of view from how they experienced what was happening on the event timeline. So you got all these different perspectives about the event, how the event unfolded, what was the cause, how did this happen. So when you're telling that story, okay, you're telling the story based on second-hand knowledge. So what if somebody comes along and says, hey, Robert, guess what? You missed this. You missed that piece of data. That's not a full data analysis. Well, how do I get all the data? I got to go back in time, look at all the data. Can we recover all the data? Yeah, we can, because this is a hologram. So everything's numerically qualified. So we can go back and look at the data, and we can make sure that we got all the data. So that's why when you look at data analysis, particularly if you're going to do a study because you're a scientist, you want to make sure that you got all the data. So we have a way to quantify to make sure that all the data that we're using to come up with a result that we tell you this is what happened, we got to make sure that we have all the data. So we have a spec, a plus or a minus, right? That plus or a minus is actually based on the speed at which you're going forward and reverse in time, based on all the data that's being processed in a simulator. Okay? Think about that for a second. So we don't live in a tunnel, by the way. It's like everything is universal. So whatever's possible is possible to happen, see? So now we're down to belief systems. You want to believe an asteroid is going to hit the planet. I don't live in a universe in which things like that happen. Why is that? Because I don't choose to experience those things. So if I'm not giving energy, okay, to experience those kind of things, then chances are I'm not going to experience that. But if you get 7.5 billion people whose state of consciousness believe it's going to happen, that's a lot of energy being used to experience that in a bidirectional mirror, which means we're all the movie projectors. So we make that happen in the movie. So you think about it, we're in a movie. Yes. A movie simulator. So when you think about moving from the fourth world to the fifth world, we're changing the simulator. We're changing the data that we're using to experience who we are in a different world, a new world. Okay? Not a new world order run by lower frequency consciousness, but a new world that runs on higher frequency consciousness, which is higher density, which means we're not doing things that don't serve us because we realize what does serve us. So what does serve us the best? Love is the law. So that got into my comment to Jason Whitlock. His comment yesterday on his video about Breonna Taylor is he was being accused, okay, of not giving love and respect to the female side of the cosmos. Now, apparently Jason Whitlock is a homosexual. So one of the things that I said to him was, listen, it's obvious based on all your comments that you perceive the universe through the male side of things. Okay, you're a self-described Christian. You believe that God created the universe, which is sort of like either the second or the third person, rather than something that is already within you that you create. You have creative imagination, right? Well, that makes you a creator being. Now, if you're not Xeroxing something that somebody else made, okay, which is a Xerox copy of it, why don't you come up with something original that nobody's ever thought of, nobody's ever experienced? Then I get to experience what you experienced based on what you created. Now I can experience what that is. So if you experienced it and you created it with what love is, then I'm going to experience it the same way I experience my universe, which is what love is. Now we're in waveform harmony with each other, right? So imagine you're living in a cosmos which is driven by what love is at a minimum frequency. That means that none of us are doing any harm to each other because we hold all life sacred. So what I said to him, and this is true because one of the reasons that I do this, and it was even prompted to put any of these videos up, is to provide a different perspective. Okay? Now this particular avatar, and when I look at my bloodline, I'm an Indian. Okay? A native Indian. Okay? So when you examine and look at how Indians live, look at the history of how Indians live, we don't live the same way that others do on this planet. Okay? We don't. So for example, Anna von Reitz, who does a really good job of breaking down all the alphabet soup of how law is defined and described and thus carried out, for example. She does a great job of going back and look at the entire history of the Articles of Confederation, what are known as second law nations, what it means to be a second law nation. And I applied this to the same thing with Jason Whitlock, okay, which has to do with Indians, native Indians, which means we are native to this realm. We honor the matriarch, okay? And that comes natural for me. I don't even have to think about that. Why is that? You know why that is? Because I implicitly trust, okay, the decisions, and how do I put it? The wisdom that a birth giver has, okay? So in many ways, I think of the birth giver of the cosmos. So you can also translate in the way I did yesterday about data. When you think about what a seed is that a male provides to the female mitochondria. The female mitochondria is a database. So you're providing data, which represents your seed, okay? The evolution of your experiences, which is data-driven. So you're sending data that is in that seed to another lab. That lab is a female mitochondria that is data-driven. Then what comes out of that female birth canal is hopefully based on the best available data. To do what? Provide a better product in which to advance the cosmos. Advance the higher creative intelligence of the cosmos in living spirit. So that we can end Star Wars, end electric wars. Okay? So when I mentioned that to Jason Whitlock, because of the fact that he perceives things through the male side, I described to him why Indians on this planet that are native are known as first law nations. And just as Meredith Quinn would describe in an interview that he had on a video about the difference between tribes and white races. The difference between a savage and a primitive. Okay? Savage meaning we live in the trees. Why? Because the energy is higher. We prefer to hang out with a goddess in living spirit, which is the great living spirit of Mother Earth. So we honor her, okay? Because she is the biggest energy giver in this planet. So we honor her by giving her love back and love to everybody that's here. That's what it means to be first law. First law, which is first light, which is what love is. So the first sound vibration that a soul is going to experience coming in through the heart chakra in a biological mother is going to be a love vibration, which is a sound vibration. Okay? So that's one of the reasons why we honor the matriarch, because every species has a first mother. So we honor the mother that is giving birth to life. That's creation. It doesn't work backwards. So as I mentioned before in a previous video, when a girl and a guy are a reflection of each other, of what it means in unconditional love that they give to each other, they are a reflection of each other in a bidirectional mirror, aren't they? That's a god and a goddess. Because I know what it feels like to be with a goddess. I know what it feels like to be a male in love with a goddess. how much fire we have for her energy, the essence of her spirit. It is so powerful that it's like feeling captured by the beauty and the love that you have for being with something that beautiful to experience. That's what ignites the fire in that furnace. Bang! Let's kick out another universe, girl. Together, we become one in living spirit, the embodiment of that much love, which is that much light. So how hot does it burn? As hot as it can get. You have that much love in your heart? Absolutely. So I mentioned that to Jason Whitlock because of this idea, because of the comments that lady made. I forget her name, something Taylor, who's a sports journalist with ESPN. She's a very beautiful black woman, apparently. But she apparently had been going back and forth with this guy named Jason Whitlock. So now we're in an argument that is going between male and females. So what are we back to? Feminism again? So this, again, is all based on lack of data. And the reason that it's based on lack of data is because they don't want you to know all the data. What is all the data? The history of this galaxy and the history of this planet. They don't want to tell you everybody that's here. They don't want to tell you who the white races are. Just because somebody looks white doesn't mean that's who exactly that they are. That doesn't mean they're tribe. That doesn't mean they're native. You're not going to know who they really are without measuring the core frequency vibration of the being that is operating that holographic projection. Because they know how to do that. They don't want to discuss that either. They don't want to let the cat out of the bag. They like to keep these discussions that are all conflict driven so that nobody knows the truth, which is what love is. That's first law. That's first law Nation Indians. That's who I am. I'm an Indian. So I share with you the truth because that's what I experience. The truth through my heart, which is what love is. I'll leave you that for the day.